Hi there. It's time for another episode of the Frugal Crafter podcast. I still don't really know what I'm doing here in podcast land, but I'm having fun and I hope you are too. I always enjoy listening to podcasts while I'm exercising or doing chores. And hey, if it makes your chores go a little bit quicker or your workout go a little bit nicer, then I am happy to be here. So, what I want to talk about today actually is a response to a question that I received on YouTube. A viewer had asked what palette I generally use, what watercolor palette that is. I usually grab when I am going to paint outside on the deck, for instance, or paint in the studio, or travel paint with. And I thought that was a really interesting question. Now, I think the viewer was probably looking for advice on what palette to buy, or maybe what empty palette to purchase to fill with their own paints. But I had to kind of laugh because I had a very short answer for her. And the answer was, I grab whatever's closest. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I'm really not that particular. As long as a paint is a good quality, I can paint with pretty much anything. So, 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to grab whatever's closest. I will rarely go seek out a new palette. If I feel like painting and I'm just like sitting at my desk and I feel inspired. So, in my desk right now, if I'm sitting in my filming room, in the drawer next to, I can open this drawer actually where I'm recording, because I'm recording in my filming room. I can take out the palettes that I have handy. I have a large 48 set palette with Turner watercolors in it. Now, this actually is not 48 colors. What I have here is a mixture of half pans and full pans. So I know this is a podcast and not a video, but if you can picture the metal tins that most watercolor sets come in, I have this empty Meeden tin that I purchased off Amazon for, I don't know, maybe like $20. And I put an assortment of half pans and full pans in here. I have filled them with my Turner tube paints. I have a signature set of Turner paints and Lucas paints at jerrysartorama.com. If you go there and search Lindsay, you'll see my 3 signature sets that I have. And I've put in the tube paints for my signature set. I have put in a few random Lucas pans, half pans that I purchased open stock. And I also have the Turner metallics in here as well. I do like to sort my paints by manufacturer because I do so many product reviews, and often I'll compare a couple brands that I find to be very similar head to head, and it's just handy to have them organized in palettes. Now, if I wasn't doing reviews on YouTube, I would put everything in one big palette and keep them together. I don't really think, if you're painting as a professional painter or you're painting as a hobbyist, I don't think there's any reason to have a bazillion palettes. You can have one big palette, and when you run out of Sennelier ultramarine blue and you want to try Daniel Smith, put it right in the same well. I don't think there's a big need to keep them separated by brand, unless you're also a connoisseur of different paints and you want to keep them separate just for your own curiosity and because you like to collect different brands. That's a whole different thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But as far as being a painter, and just the utilitarian aspects of it, there's no reason you can't, top off your Daniel Smith ultramarine with a Sennelier ultramarine or a Turner ultramarine. You can even double check the pigment codes on the tubes of paint to make sure you're putting in the same, pigment formulation. Because once you're dealing with professional grade paint, there really isn't a huge difference. Now, some brands may granulate more because they don't mill the paints as fine. You may prefer one over the other. One's not better, one's not worse. It just depends on what you like. Or one brand might use PV19 for their permanent alizarin crimson, and another brand might use a different cool red, and then another brand might use the authentic alizarin crimson that's fugitive, and you might prefer that because maybe you reproduce your work, or you only work in sketchbooks and you'd rather have that historical color than have a more permanent modern version, and that's totally fine. So you might want to keep your eyes open on pigment codes if you're concerned about that, but yeah, I keep mine separated by brand just because of the nature of my work. I often am reviewing products, or if I'm doing a tutorial, I might want to stick to one brand. Maybe there's a really good sale on one brand, and I'll use that one just so people can see how it looks if they're interested in taking advantage of the sale. So anyway, that big palette is in in the drawer. I also have I think I have a couple Schminke half pans too that were duplicates that I put in there. And I always make a little chart for whatever palette I have on watercolor paper in the order and arrangement that the paints appear in my tin, so that I can see what I really have. Because when you're looking at colors in watercolor palettes and watercolor half pans, they look a lot different than what they're going to look like painted out on watercolor paper because they're a transparent paint. So you're not going to see how they really look in the pans. They're going to look much darker. So making yourself a little map of your palette is really helpful. And then you can also see the textures that some of your paints have. Like in this Turner set, I actually have some additional Turner colors, like I have Mayan blue, which looks very different painted out than it does in the pan, both tone wise and also texture wise. So it's just really a handy tool to make. And it doesn't really cost you much to make. It just costs you a piece of watercolor paper. I also have my signature Lucas set of 24 colors. Now, I also have the set of 48 Lucas colors. I purchased that myself before I ever had a signature set because I was curious about the paints because they are such a good value. So I have that in my desk drawer too with a color map so I can see exactly what the colors look like. I have a set of pastel. This is odd. I have this little set of pastel ink. It's not Inktense, it's Derwent pastel watercolors because they're just a really beautiful pastel set and you can layer them up quite a bit, much more than like say the Prima pastels. And I guess I just have that in there because I want to play with them a little bit more. That's something else I'll do. I'll just kind of tuck things in my drawer next to my filming table that I want to play with a little bit more. I also have my Paul Rubens metallic set of 24. Now, I also have the metallic set of 48, but the 24 set is just so good and so robust, and the colors are all so useful. There's no like two samey colors there. It's my favorite metallic watercolor set. And I keep that in there too, because often I'll be working on a project where I'm working on black paper, or maybe I'm working over a dark area and I want to add some iridescence and I can paint on top of like ink or a darker watercolor with the metallic Paul Rubens paints. And they just look so fantastic over dark. So I keep that one in here. It's smaller than the 48 set and I know the colors really well. So it's really nice to use. I also keep my set of 24 Turner tubes in that drawer because if I need to top off my palette or maybe I don't feel like working out of my tin, I can just put those into a ceramic palette for the sake of a tutorial. So I only have the colors that I'm using right there to hand. So most of the time I'll be using one of those paint sets because they're right there. You can also easily substitute with a colors that you have on your palette already, since a lot of the colors in my signature sets are customary colors. You know, I am always using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, permanent alizarin crimson, or quinacridone red. I'm using those colors over and over again, and they're not fancy colors. They're colors that you can obtain very affordably and very easily no matter where you live in the world. And that's really important to me because I don't want to be using stuff that's so unusual that the average painter that has trouble finding it. And then if I look behind me on my shelf, I'll have a few of my newer palettes, usually ones that I'm getting ready to review, or ones that I'm getting used to or just really enjoying at the moment. And currently I have my Art Whale tube palette there. I have squeezed down to a little, it's really interesting actually. It's a Royal and Langnickel foldable palette. And I think it's about $8. It's not very expensive. You can find them in big box craft stores and art supply stores. But the thing that I like about the Royal and Langnickel foldable plastic palette is that all of the spaces for color are on one side. Often you get the folding palettes and they've got half the wells on the top and half on the bottom. And I don't like that because I live in Maine. Maine gets very humid in the summer, and some of your paints can kind of travel and migrate out of the pans when they're on the top and the bottom. So I don't like that. I don't like the risk of contaminating, because watercolor paints last so long that if you have like a half pan of paint that drips down into another one or slides out of the pan and you end up throwing away half of a half pan, that's like probably 50 paintings worth. You really wasted a lot of paint because it's just mostly pigment and binder. It goes so far. And so I don't like that. The other advantage to this palette is, and I showed it in my Art Whale review, the tube color review, is that I can actually fit like an extra 23 half pans in that side of the palette that has the paint well. So just in those extra little spaces. So you can really get a lot of colors in a small space with this Royal and Langnickel folding palette. I also keep a little nubbin of a white Prismacolor pencil in there because it's handy to have. And, I go through white Prismacolors like water, so I always have those shorties hanging around, and they fit in these travel palettes really nice. Uh, let's see, what else do I have? I have a new palette that I just purchased. It was a set of 12 Paul Rubens. It was a great deal on it, and I just couldn't resist. So that's sitting back there waiting to be unwrapped. But I'll cycle through whatever palettes I have behind me in the cubbies, either stuff I'm getting ready to review or things that I've kind of been missing and I just want to try again. So that's really how I decide what I'm going to paint with. Usually it's whatever is close to me, but sometimes I'll just be thinking, oh, I haven't painted with that for a while. I think I'll bring it out. Or sometimes I might be actually inspired by the topic that I'm going to paint. Like maybe I'm going to paint something that's just really vibrant colors. Like maybe it's like glass bottles or something. And I might decide that, boy, I haven't used my Magello Mission Gold paints in a while. So I might grab that palette because they have such intensely vibrant, transparent, smooth colors. Or I might be thinking I want to paint a nautical scene with lots of texture. So um, I might be more inclined to go with my maybe a Schmincke palette that's got some granulating colors, or that Art Whale palette that's got a lot of granulating colors in it because I want to get that moody vibe. That's basically what I go for. But I don't want to encourage people to get more palettes than they need because honestly, you can just if you want to try a new color, you can put it right in the palette that you've been using. Put it right in your studio palette. You want to try a different brand of ultramarine blue when when your daily ultramarine blue has been used up, that color goes quick. You could squirt some of that new color right in the well. And if you have some leftover ultramarine blue in there, it's not going to hurt anything. So um, I probably would want to encourage that a little bit more because I think we can get in the habit of collecting paints more than painting. And um, I know I've gotten that in that habit myself, and it doesn't make you a better painter. It can make you more informed about pigment choices, but and it's fun. I mean, let's face it, it's fun to try these different things, but it doesn't necessarily make you a better painter. And before I did YouTube, that's what I did. I had my big Jones palette or my big Pike palette, and I would just add if I needed some like warm blue, I'd grab a tube of ultramarine, add it to that pot. If I needed some more cool blue, I would add more phthalo blue. It might be, slightly different than the phthalo blue I had before, but as long as it's still a cool, transparent blue, it's going to be fine to go right in that well. I'm not that picky, I guess, and get down to it. Some people are much more picky than I am. Now, as far as travel palettes, I really am an advocate for the original portable painter. If I'm going to go outside to paint and I'm going to if I'm going by myself and I know I can take as long as I want, I definitely will grab my portable painter. And that palette is a 12 color palette. If you want to envision any standard 12 color tin, it's kind of like that, except it's made from plastic. And instead of it being a metal outside case, what it is, it's a plastic palette. It's got two wings that fold out. They're not quite as big as the wings on a standard 12 tin. They're a little bit smaller. And the pans are a little bit more, they're full half pans or regular half pans. All right. Should say standard. They're standard half pans, and 12 of them fit in the portable painter, and there's a little channel where a little brush goes, and it comes with this kind of like double-ended brush. So you've got a small brush and then a micro, I would say, brush. So I bring some larger brushes as well. And then there are two water pots that actually slide over the palette on each side. So there's two cups, they just slide right over. They're kind of like an oval shaped. And then there's a little clip that holds it all together. So when you get where you're painting, all you do is you slide off the clip and you pull the two caps off of off of the palette, and you secure them to each end of the palette. There's a little channel they slide into. Then you can use your water bottle or whatever you've brought to fill up each of the water pots, and then that can set either on the ground. If you're sitting in a chair or in a kayak, you can set that whole rig right on your leg, and the water pots will balance it out on each side, and you open up the little wings of your palette for mixing, and you are ready to go. I love that because I've got 2 buckets of water. Even though they're small, as long as you have 2 buckets of water and you always clean your brush in one side and you always get fresh water from the other side, that's going to keep you in fresh water for several paintings. And I prefer to use real brushes rather than travel brushes, so that works really well for me. I can take that, I can do a couple paintings in the kayak, I could sit on a beach, I could hike somewhere and then sit on the ground. It just works really well for me, and I really like that. The palette I would bring if I didn't have very much time, I have 2. One is either the Viviva color sheets, which is just like a little paper book, and it's just got these little like swatches of color, and you use a water brush and you pick up a little bit. It's actually more of an ink than a watercolor, to be fair. It's like the Peerless watercolors, if you've ever seen those, but the Viviva ones come in a little booklet. So I will use that, but it can be a little cumbersome to flip between the pages to get the color you want. So it's not my favorite. It's my most compact and I like it for that, but it is a little cumbersome because you have to constantly flip through the colors. But if you're trying to be compact, it's a super transparent watercolor. It works really well for that. The other thing I've started using is a portable painter micro. It is bigger than the booklet of the Viviva color sheets. It's not bigger in like a footprint. It's a little bit smaller in its footprint, but it is about 3/4 to an inch thick, I would say. And it's the same company that makes the portable painter that I usually use, but this is it's almost as thick as the other one, but it's about half the size. You can fit 6 half pans or 2 full pans and 2 half pans, or what I have is 1 full pan with a dab of ultramarine on one end, and that way I can pull washes in that whole pan space. And then I have some Hansa yellow, some quinacridone rose, and some cobalt teal, just because those colors work really well in the main landscape where I usually find myself if I'm outside painting, especially during this pandemic. Um, and you can fold it all out. You can clip it to your sketchbook if you want to. I usually just hold it in one hand. I hold it in my left hand, my brush in my right hand. I use a water brush. And then I've got I can either hold my sketchbook, which is a small 3.5 by 5.5 inch Stillman and Byrne mixed media beta series book. I'll hold that in the same hand as my palette and I'll paint with my right hand. And that all fits in like a waterproof pencil case with a white gel pen, a black permanent pen, a pencil, like a mechanical pencil, and a rag. Oh, and I keep a little Kool-Aid flavor enhancer bottle that I've washed out full of water, and that fills up my water brush like 3 times. So I can slide that pencil case, which is just like a plastic pencil case, like a soft pencil pouch. I can slide that on the interior pocket of my kind of windbreaker raincoat. It's kind of like a spring fall jacket, I would say. And I can slide that right in the interior pocket. So it's very discreet. And if I find myself somewhere where I have some time to sketch, I can do a quick sketch that way. I could even just sketch with a pen or the pencil in my sketchbook and paint it later if I feel that I don't have time to let the sketchbook dry and close it before I have to move on. But it's just really handy. And I find traveling with something like that to be very calming because I tend to be a little anxious if I'm traveling or if I'm in big crowds. So having something like that is kind of like a touchstone of normality, and that really helps. And surprisingly, the pandemic hasn't made me any more fond of being in big crowds of people, so that's worked out really well. And then I should probably go into how I keep my palettes that I'm not using. Oh, she did also ask what I use if I'm at my I call it my fun art desk. It's a desk in the corner of my bedroom right outside. You can walk right outside to a balcony, and I like to sit out there and paint a lot during the summer. And on that desk, I will rotate the palettes, but what's always up there usually is my Paul Rubens set of 24 phosphorescent paints. Now these paints are kind of unusual. They're not like the metallic paints I told you I had in the drawer next to my filming desk. They're a very transparent watercolor, very jewel-like, but they have this hint of shimmer and you really only see it if the light catches it. So it's really fun to use in a sketchbook because every once in a while the light will catch it and you'll see just a little sparkle and it's very subtle. It's I don't even think it would show up in a photograph really. It's just it's kind of something you appreciate in person, but it doesn't really detract if you're photocopying or photographing the artwork. And I really like that tin of watercolors. It's kind of novel. It's a little bit unique, super transparent. So there's no white in that palette. There's no like opaque browns. Everything is very, very transparent in that palette. So that's kind of fun to use. I have that up there. I recently brought my teeny little Etcher ceramic palette. It's a palette designed by Stephanie Law, who's an artist who does a lot of miniature wildlife and fantasy artwork. And it's such a cute palette. It's very unpractical for the way I work. I usually work with big brushes, which doesn't work in that tiny palette. It's a tiny palette. It's about 3 inches circle, about 3-inch circle, and it's got 37 wells. So you can imagine the wells in there are super tiny. It was very hard to fill. I had to fill it from my tiniest tubes because a lot of times I like to purchase my watercolor tubes, especially for colors that I use a lot. I'll buy the 15 milliliter tubes or the 37 milliliter tubes from Da Vinci, and the necks on those tubes are just too big to fill that tiny palette. But anyway, watercolor does go a long way, so that's one good thing. But that's up there. It's darling. It's absolutely adorable. It's not very practical, but for tiny sketchbook work, it's kind of fun to use. So I have that up on my table right now, and I actually have my new Rosa Gallery watercolors up there because that's a very traditional palette. And I find that I really am, my roots are in traditional watercolor where you're using your like, my traditional palette, what I started with was, alizarin crimson, Prussian blue, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, nickel titanate, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, burnt umber, and, yeah, that was it. That was pretty much it. And I like that the Rosa Gallery has a very traditional feel to me, and, I do find myself really kind of going back to those colors. I have since swapped my alizarin crimson for a quinacridone red and my Prussian blue for a phthalo blue, just for light fast purposes and because I like the more vibrant colors that they produce. But there is something, but I do need to, I feel like I really need to have either a yellow ochre or a raw sienna and a burnt umber or a burnt sienna, just have those kind of traditional earthy colors. And the Rosa Gallery paints just feel like a very traditional set to me, and I find it to be very versatile. It's also very inexpensive, and it's also full pans. And I got to say, because I was trained on using a studio palette, like one of the big plastic studio palettes, like a John Pike palette. Since I'm used to using big brushes, I like having large wells. And you can store a lot more paints in tins using pans, either full or half pans, and I really like full pans. So the Rosa watercolors are full pans, or maybe 3/4 pans, or just a little bit smaller than like a, say, a Winsor& Newton full pan, but I like that size because it can accommodate all my brushes, and I do enjoy working larger, so that does, that gives me that ability. And with the fold out wings on the metal palette, I have a lot of mixing space. In fact, I do find myself, I used to always love the studio palettes more, but I find that I rarely have a large, if I'm filming, I don't have enough space to have that whole studio palette in view. But the more I've gotten used to using the tins, the more I've liked using the tins. So, so I've kind of changed my spots a little bit because I've gone from preferring a studio palette with huge wells to, being just fine with a tin with full pans and even half pans because it's, you get more colors with half pans and it can be kind of fun to have that variety. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not really that particular. I'll paint with whatever is handy, and I'm always up for trying something new. That might not be your case, but that's how I like to roll. And I think it's just really important to understand that it is it's the magician, not the wand, that makes the magic. It is the painter, not the tools, not the bazillion palettes that make you a good artist. And honestly, if you want my advice, it would be buy some decent quality paints. Buy paints that are, people always say, buy the best you can afford. I say buy the best you're not afraid to use because you can afford a $500 tin of watercolors, but if you're too afraid to use them because you don't want to waste them or they become too precious or you end up making a shrine to them and you don't actually dare to get them wet because you don't want to, you know, um, you don't want to make them look messy or you don't want to harm them or you feel like you need to preserve them, that's not going to help you become a better painter. Buy the best paints that you are going to use without worrying about them being too precious. And that might be Winsor& Newton Cotman. That might be the Pretty Excellent set on Amazon that's like between $16 and $20 all the time. And maybe Paul Rubens Artist Grade. That's a great paint. It's very affordable. It might be Rosa Gallery or White Nights, which are, again, great paints that are very affordable. Then again, you might feel that it's not worth your time to paint unless you have a Gallio handmade watercolors out of Italy. I've never tried those. They look delightful, but I think I might be a little precious with them. If I spent that kind of money on paints, I might be afraid to use them. And I don't want paints that I'm afraid to use in my studio. So buy the best paints that you will actually use and not be afraid of them being too precious. And hey, that might be a set of Prang from Walmart. That's actually Prang's regular paint, not the washable, but the regular is actually pretty darn good, and you can learn on that. Um, use what you have and experiment and have fun. And you don't put too much emphasis or I don't know. I don't say put too much value. Don't what do I want to say? Don't take too much advice. My advice is to stop taking other painters' advice and buy what you want to buy and use it and enjoy it and have fun. Paint is meant to be used. The only wasted paint is the paint that stays in the tube and never gets opened. So keep that. That's what I want to leave you with. I think that's a good thought for the day. I hope you're having a great day. I want to thank you for listening to my podcast and giving me a chance, because I clearly don't know what I'm doing here in podcast land, but I'm having fun and I hope you are too. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Happy crafting. Bye.